Land acknowledgement. The TNRD acknowledge that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district. And today we're located on the Thompson-Nicola territory, situated with the unceded ancestral lands of the Shuapnik Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership, and we have the Thompson-Nicola respect the territory and land on which we gather. First item is the minutes from January 19th meeting. There's a recommendation. Moved in second. All in favor? Motion's carried. And the next item is reports from our about our planning advisory commission. Regina Sadokovic will be giving the presentation. Thank you.
I almost didn't do any slides. So we really hope to have clear direction from the electoral areas this morning. I have a short report on our advisory planning commissions. And we've been at this review since 2018 we started. So I'm not going to go through the whole history. All that is in the report. I'm just going to give you the highlights of where we're at now. So first, what is an advisory planning commission? I'm just going to say APC because I try not to use acronyms because they're evil and there's too many of them. An APC is not required by legislation, nor is an agricultural advisory commission. We've had them both. We also have a board of variance that this is what development services, I should just bracket that. This is what we have in development services. These are volunteer bodies, all of them. The only one of the three that's legislated and required is the board of variance. We do have an APC bylaw in effect, but our actual APC commissions are on hiatus, and there's good reason why they're on hiatus. So, but going back, what is an APC? It's basically an advisory group. They don't have any power to approve anything, but they make recommendations, and then their recommendations are brokered by staff through a report to the board. And it's on any land use, really. So the key is land use. It's not a setback. It's not a minor hardship. They would look at rezoning applications, new official community plans. They certainly were involved in when we have an omnibus change to a zoning bylaw, and also anything that the board opts to refer to them. So at present, under the current bylaw, there are three. They're broken up by electoral area geography, and across these three, there's 21 members. Now, I've been here for a dozen years. This is my 12th year here. APCs have been in effect in the TNRD since the 1970s. As I'm told, even before my time, it has become harder and harder to get volunteers, especially in like up north. You've got people volunteering for other commissions, for fire protection, for what have you. Out of 230 people, how do you find more volunteers? So we've been plagued with vacancies. The other sorts of, let's just go over some of the dilemmas. We have folks on our APCs that can no longer drive. They're in their 80s and 90s. They can't answer email, even if they have an email, or they don't. They don't reply to calls. It is so hard for our staff time. Like, there was more people on our APCs than we have staff in development services. So if we don't have somebody who doesn't reply to emails, it's very hard to get a meeting together. We understand why some of them don't reply or can't make it. Under the bylaw, if they miss 2 meetings, they're supposedly out, but we don't actually do that. We beg them to come or to reply to us. When we don't have quorum, we're not under the bylaw, the way it's written now, we're not supposed to have a meeting, but sometimes they'll still have a meeting anyway, or they'll there won't be quorum and the applicant will show up, or they do have a quorum, everybody's there and the applicant doesn't take the time to attend. And so then staff in effect become the mouthpiece for the applicant, which is awkward. One, which this is what I'm probably the most concerned about, and I have included at the end, just so you have a sense of it. But just so you see what we prepare for them, we included some sample minutes and some sample APC agendas. You will see, like the Agriculture Advisory Commission or the Board of Variance, we prepare just the facts report. We do not give them recommendations. We do attend all the meetings. We do not lead them one way or another. What's good about APCs is they give the applicant a chance to have a kick at an advisory group before the board. Another challenge, like the appointment and the reappointment process, I think it is not working, and that's one reason why they're on hiatus. In some cases, some directors couldn't find volunteers, or staff were chasing the board to appoint members, whereas with the Agriculture Advisory Commission or our Board of Variance, we'll often talk to board members, but we bring a report and a recommendation to board, and then it's ratified. The appointment to all these bodies is via the board as a whole. So it's not like when you appoint your alternate, it's not the same process. There is a process. These are groups that are function under a bylaw, appointed for a set term as volunteers by the board as a whole. We've also, historically, the APCs had minute secretaries, and it's in the bylaw that they can hire their own secretary to take their minutes. A lot of them haven't been able to do that, so staff do the minutes. They're still approved by the chair of the APC, but will attend the meetings and do the minutes. And we do the minutes for the Board of Variance and the Agriculture Advisory Commission as well. We do have a volunteer policy and a conflict of interest volunteer policy. Between these three bodies, they're not all even, certainly in terms of, and this isn't in the bylaw, the APC was the only group that was getting a $75 voucher for having an event once a year. That $75 has not changed for like decades, and they've said it's not enough. Only one of the three APCs actually had a Christmas gathering. Also, because of the age, I know the one reason it went on hiatus was the lack of reappointments, but another reason was COVID. So all that kind of happened at the same time. Now, to the applications, looking at about 10 years plus. So these are the kinds of applications that would go there. So it's over 100. And I think it's 2 or 3. I had our staff go back in the minutes to see how many were there actually not recommended. And there's only, well, it's good to have a meeting and the applicant gets to talk and answer questions. Staff can get some information that helps us write the report. But the APCs were basically a supporting body. There's one of those 3, I know it's because they didn't like the applicant, not because the application was approved. It was a down zoning, but the applicant rubbed them the wrong way. So while it's good to have them, I think we don't have this with our Board of Variance, and we don't have this with our Agricultural Advisory Commission. So it is very, very uncomfortable for a group of volunteers to discuss and vote on an application, especially if it might be in the negative. And that's one of the challenges. But if we're going to appoint somebody, they have to be willing to do that. We've had one APC, and I wrote about it. Oh, let's just go back for a second. And this is critical. We have one APC that's actually one of our more functional APCs that met the most, but they have decades of where most of the meetings were in this room. They would just hear from the applicant, and then they would just all stop talking and thank them, and basically push them out the door, not literally, and they can't do that. So staff are telling them that they can stay for the whole meeting. We advised the APC that they really can't do that. We gave them the legislation. We even ended up giving them a legal opinion, and yet they're volunteers, right? They refused. And it was, I know there was a bit of that. So if we have APCs, they absolutely must operate fully and entirely in open meeting. If an applicant wants to leave, that's different. But our Board of Variance makes a decision, they're volunteers with the applicant there, whether virtually, in person, or on the phone. Same with our Agriculture Advisory Commission. So this is just an aside for my therapy. This is a rezoning in 1994. This is a rezoning in 2015. It's gotten worse. This is a building permit for a house in 2000. And this is a building permit for a house. I think I picked on Tobiano. They're bigger. So we are not looking for more work. We have the same staff levels as what we had through that. All just getting anything done is more complicated in the world today. If we have APCs, we're absolutely for having an APC, but I'm going to argue for a functional APC that we have the capacity to support properly, with members that are committed to attending meetings, responding to emails, and operating in open meeting. Now, this is under the current bylaw. Again, the bylaw hasn't been repealed, it's still in place, but we recommend, I'll get to my last slide. I know in the report, we said report for information, but as I reread it, I kind of eked out a recommendation. This is the number of APC seats we have and the population, the 2021 population by EA. And the color codes, those are the three APCs. So A, B, and O are together, E, I, and N, and then the 4 around Kamloops. We suggest, because, it jumped a bit, but L and P having the greatest population, that from that pool, we could find 2 volunteers and then 1 from all the others. I believe 12, maybe 13 is the most that we can functionally have in an advisory planning commission. We have 10. Sometimes that changes, sometimes it goes down a bit, but we have 10 members on our Agricultural Advisory Commission. And I basically, what you see below, that was the previous recommendation that went to the previous board. And eventually that led to, yes, we do have more information meetings in the field, and we have more public hearings, which we can do anyway, more of them in the field. But I sort of rewrote the recommendation that I think if the EAs wish to make a recommendation to the board as a whole, that we have a APC renewal, but have a single commission of 12 or so members appointed by the board and enabled via amended bylaw, and that we make some adjustments to the bylaw. And that really, that's it. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So a question would be, what's the difference between the public hearing that we've had and an APC? Having taken part in one of the public hearings with Director Morris and Chair Roden before, I saw that the public was able to come and speak their minds and be. So what's the difference?
Night and day.
Oh, okay.
APCs are not required, but under legislation, you can have them. We did a survey. I wrote a little bit about it in the report, but it was in 2018, towards the fall of 2018. And I'd say about half of the regional districts in the province have an APC, a lot of them are having the same challenges as we are with recruiting. So almost all of them have vacancies. Public hearings are required generally, or some form of public input. And the APCs, while they're public, anybody can come to, you can come to an APC meeting. They're not advertised in the newspaper. They're not subject to a mail out. They really are a body. They're much more informal.
Okay, sorry, supplementary to that, so basically, a public hearing would serve the purpose of the applicants to express themselves, so, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's already, public hearings typically happen after second reading. Public hearings can happen anytime between first and third reading. We do them after second because it's usually, and there's a whole lot of case law on public hearings. There's no cases on, like, no case law that about advisory planning commissions, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Just because I'm a newbie, does this mean the 12 members, we would have representation from each regional electoral area? in the
Yes,
12 members?
I would suggest that those numbers be, if we have a single one, where all the electoral areas would have one appointee. And just L and P, which currently have 3, would have 2. So we'd have a total of 12, because that's, so we get a good appointment, a good representation. And I think applicants like advisory planning commissions, and they happen before the report even comes to the board for first reading, or for first, could say it's a temporary use permit, like the ones we have 2 TUPs this afternoon. So that TUP is a land use function. A development variance permit is like a setback. It's not a change in use. So the neighbors aren't advised or invited to an advisory planning commission, but it can be a time to, I guess, bring out any issues. An applicant gets to kind of state their case at one point before, because if there's no APC meeting, the applicant still states their case. They do it in their application, or they do it to the staff member that's processing their application. But that's,
Thank you.
sometimes that's not enough for people.
I'm just curious, how do you go about recruiting people to be on the APC? Because I myself have never heard of it. And I'm just wondering, like, if you're noticing that people are aging out or not involved, what is the process to get people engaged?
So we have had people on the same individuals on the APCs since the 1970s. And they were still on them a couple of years ago, but it's very hard for them. They even themselves said, look, I'm aging out. I can't keep doing this. They would be appointed by the board, and it was always done typically under new business. And an electoral area director would typically raise, well, I'd like to appoint XYZ person to the APC. But sometimes the electoral area directors would forget, and then be people like me chasing them and reminding them and hounding and nagging them. I think what we'd like to do, and also it's a 4-year term, so you only have to do it once in 4 years. And unless somebody passes away, moves, retires, or stops showing up to meetings, then just like any, I think, like our Board of Variance or our Ag Advisory Commission, we'd be appointing midstream. We would always talk to, if it's for a given electoral area, of course we would talk to yourselves for your area. But if you've appointed somebody who doesn't reply to email, it puts us in no, we're going to tell you, of course you can appoint whoever you, or recommend to the board whoever you'd like. I want to formalize it. So it goes, a report goes at the time of appointment through staff like it does for our other bodies, and then comes to the board. But you would always have a say in it and you would have a vote.
So can you tell me the way that you would like the direction of this to go? Do you see that there will still be issues around finding the volunteers and the commitment level? And then what's their accountability once they're actually as a volunteer on a committee?
So if we can keep them interested, like we have folks that are right now, we do have some people who are very committed to the APC. They go out in their own time, separate from the meeting, drive out to where the application is, check it out, take photos, prepare a PowerPoint. So we have people who are willing to do that, but at least we won't have to find 21 of them. So yes, I think we can find people. But we've got 2 APCs that, and it's in, I didn't put the slide up, but it's in the report. They meet once a year. It's hard to get excited and invested in a group that only meets once a year. I think that you need to, like our AAC is, they reply, they're here on time. We've always had an excessive quorum. I want that for the APC. So having more than one thing, like we usually have 6+ applications for our Ag Advisory Commission. I would like to have where our APC, if they're going to come all this way, that they have more than one application to look at. So they're involved, interested, and maybe they'll meet 6 times a year or 4 times a year instead of once a year. So I think we could solve a whole bunch of things that way. We have, when we've recruited, it's been through the electoral area directors. I don't know what they do if they talk to people in the field. We can put ads in the newspapers. Lots of municipalities, when they strike up committees and commissions, they'll put call for expression of interest. So like we have, for example, on our board of variance, we have a retired planner, a contractor, and a retired subcontractor, which is a really good mix. That's one of the best mix. We've always mined our retired board directors for the board of variance as well, because they know what they're in for.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Could you tell us the names of the people that are in our area?
Yes, I can. Off the cuff, 21 of them would be difficult. I can email you. So they've not been reappointed. There's nobody appointed right now. But I can give you the names of who's where. Your area is Carla Bacon. There's Christine Woodward, Tom Pitt, Harley Wright, Jean McRobert, Peter Nixon, Holly Campbell. This is like
I'm just interested in area E, but
there's more.
Are we allowed to contact them?
Of course you are. You're free to do as you'd wish in that regard, but I think it would be best to get direction with what they're from I guess, a recommendation from this body to the board, and then board to give staff some direction on what to do with the bylaw before contacting them. Because it was some directors last time who just, again, we've been at this since 2018. Where staff would really like, the bylaw has not been repealed. Our key is, the best case scenario is having a good functioning APC or no APC. We just didn't want to continue what we were doing. There were some directors who thought there should be no APC. So before you contact them, I think it would be best to get a recommendation from this body and then that from the board, we can readily do a bylaw amendment. And then you can talk to about who wants to be reappointed. But I would just ask if, before you can, we do have people who won't reply to emails. And we don't want them on the commission.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. So I just repeat, I found it refreshing. I dealt with the APC 27 years ago. And it was useful because they were not elected officials and they were not administration. They were just people from our area to hear a story. There wasn't the formal sit at the back, give 5-minute presentation, no questions answered. That seems to be intimidating for some people. And if you talk to a planning official, of course, we would expect our administration to say, here's what our policies are, we're backing our policies and so on and so forth. This had a little bit more give and take. And I think that it's a useful function. I happened to speak to Dave Monsees, who has been since 27 years ago involved with the APC. So, and Dave Monsees and Peter Nixon and George Tatton and Bob Dalglish, they keep showing up on these pieces of paper that I see from time to time. So yeah, we've got an institution of APC people. When I talked to Dave Monsees about the report, he said, look, we do serve a function. It's useful for people. I've just described that. The second thing that he more or less said is we don't seem to get much recognition. We don't know where we stand. I don't know if they received a letter of thank you or anything like that, but if that hasn't happened, I think that's an appropriate thing, even if they're not coming back. I think that that's something that needs to be dealt with. He canvassed some of the people that you talked about, and they were quite fine with refreshing and renewal and all the rest of it. These folks are now in their 70s and their 80s, and I'm sure we can find somebody that can give us that opinion that's not a planner and not one of us, but just a member from the community. So I would wholeheartedly look for a revised, refreshed APC that's functional. And thank you for your presentation.
Just quickly, we did send letters of thank you and explanation to everyone, just like when people leave or move. We don't send them a gift or anything. We did, and I also spoke to all the chairs, and we went in 2019 and 2020 to the APCs to get their input on changes to the APC as well. So this wasn't sudden.
Thank you. Just for clarification then, if I have this right, we're looking at possibly amending this to bring down the numbers of people. You're saying that a lot of the people that we currently have don't necessarily respond to email or show up for these meetings. Is there anything that says that we can't basically hit a restart button and make recommendations for new people that we figure will be more engaged? Do we have, in other words, I think what I'm asking is, say, for example, area I have no idea who that person or persons are, but can we just start from scratch?
Yes, absolutely. I think some folks who, as Director Grenier said, are committed and understand the history of the APCs and are very responsive. Absolutely, we would be recommending to reappoint them if they're willing to serve. That's the other thing. You have to make sure they're willing to serve, and you have to let them know of the commitment. In some places, I think we need new people. And I would just to say it's not most, it's some that don't reply to email. I just want to make sure that's clear. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Since this board is going to make a recommendation, I just wanted to share with the rest of the board my experience and knowledge with members of the public about this APC. I was reached, somebody did reach out to me in past months about, whether or not this APC would be happening again. And the feeling I got from the member of the public was that they were frustrated that it was, there was a sense from the public that it was removed, like, a platform for them to voice that was removed. Personally, the prospect of adding 6 more meetings a year is not that enticing, but I think for me personally, one of the things during election, transparency and adding, giving people voice is an important thing. So I would be in favor of, making this return in some form.
So the APC, the Board of Variance, APC, Ag Advisory Commission, their agendas are, I think they're on our website, they're public, but usually the board members don't show up. They don't have to show up to any of those meetings. They can, of course. I think, we have I know Director Rothenberger used to show up to about one every year or two. So we've had Renee showed up a few times. Just if there was something interesting that they really wanted to be there at the APC for, but the vast majority of meetings, it's just the volunteers and 1 member of staff.
Thank you very much. Just a simple question. Do the outcomes of a well-functioning advisory plan committee, would it help advise when we move forward into longer-term OCP planning? So there is an avenue for a natural link between those, is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
So when we're doing a whole new OCP, like the North Thompson OCP, or when we did Cherry Creek Savannah in 2014, 16, we had a separate committee that was charged temporarily just for that process. And they met quite a bit, but anything they did would eventually, before say first reading, go to the APC as well, because the APC is usually broader. So when you've got a big project, like depending on what happens with the regional growth strategy, if there is a direction from the board to proceed with an amendment, we would have a separate, like a subcommittee that just lives for the life of that project.
Great, thank you, Chair Laird. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. As you can see, there's a lot of staff in the room as well, so I just want to kind of just let you know who's here in case you don't know who they all are, because every one of them, with the exception of Regina, is involved very heavily in the gas tax and the whole community building fund program. So Ian Dalgleish is our capital and facilities manager. And then I think you all know Chelsea and Kim. Jamie and Agnes are very much involved. Agnes is probably, she's been involved the longest in this entire room, and that's a compliment because we're going to rely on her for history today. Carla, of course, is here. And of course, Olivia is doing a great job like she always does. Online, you'll see that Brand Falker has also joined us. So he has got a presentation and a Q&A session that'll be coming up here in a few slides. He's from UBCM and is the manager coordinator of the actual program through the province. Then that will might be helpful as we go through this. With the utmost sincerity and respect, I really want to share some opening comments because I think we all been anticipating this meeting, and I'm glad we're actually having this discussion. I also got the feeling over the last number of weeks and months that this is somehow going to be some kind of a battle or a fight, and I can tell you that that is not the case at all. I recognize how important it is for community funding and the opportunity for EA directors to support infrastructure projects and the betterment of their electoral areas. My intention with this policy review is to improve it and to ensure we are all on the same page with respect to the requirements. This is especially important with this group because 8 of the 10 members in this room don't have any history at all. So it's important that we make sure that we lay out the facts and the history and we move forward together. At the end of the day, the TNRD needs to lead by example and be proactive in how we support and deliver services and projects across the region. So in my role as CAO, I'm obligated to ensure that we're operating smoothly and efficiently and effectively, that we're making decisions that are aligned with good governance, strong financial oversight, and are always protecting the organization. So the community building plan or gas tax program, as we all refer to it as, has been around for a long time. And like anything, sometimes it begins to change over the years to something different than what it was maybe originally intended. So the purpose of the meeting today from staff's perspective is quite simple. The sharing of information and facts on how the program started years ago and where it is today. Discuss some of the issues and concerns that we are running up against and the need to be addressed. Get expert information from Brant at UBCM directly, and to have an open and honest discussion about how we see this program being maybe realigned, reset, and moving forward in the future. So I would encourage everyone, including myself, to have an open mind and listen to the information that we're going to present. This is not about staff against EA directors. It's not about weighted voting or politics. This is about making sure our policy meets all those requirements. And making sure that we're meeting the obligations and the requirements of the federal government who fund this program, the province, and of course the TNRD. So I'm looking forward to a productive meeting. So we've got a bunch of slides for you that we're going to walk you through. So if you can allow us to go through some of the slides, get to Brant's presentation Q&A, and then we also have a closed session too that we're going to go into towards the end of the presentation, because we do want to walk you through some examples. And again, please realize that a lot of this stuff is sensitive because we're going to be talking about specifics. So that's why we are moving into a close, and we've done that appropriately. So with that being said, I'm going to just walk through the start of the presentation. All right, so from an agenda standpoint, so opening comments and perspective is complete. So we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the regional district, who does what, and you've seen that slide before. And then we're going to get into the program overview, the history of the gas tax, the grant application process, and then we're going to have Brant do a bit of a verbal presentation and then take any questions that you may have. We are going to then talk about the board policy overview, and then I'm going to talk about some of the concerns that we're having. Carla wants to provide her perspective as well. We're going to show you, and you probably have already seen them in your handouts, the balances that are current year to date right now. And then fund allocation, next steps, and then we'll move into the close. So unless anyone has any questions about the agenda, I can carry on. All right. So I've done that. So the purpose of a regional district, and I think a lot of us seen this at last week's LGLA, about regional districts are an independent, responsible, and accountable order of government within their jurisdiction. A regional district provides a political and administrative framework for a number of things. So providing services that are widespread across the entire region, other services that might be sub-regional or even local, as we all kind of have seen that during our budget process, and then act as a general local government or electoral areas and provide local services such as solid waste, eco depots, waterworks, and fire protection, to name a few. The TNRD provides about 125 total services with a dedicated team that operate, manage, deliver these services on a day-to-day basis. So this, I think we showed during the orientation. So I just wanted to focus in on just kind of the regional district itself, but those are some of the service kind of topics that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis, and literally takes up probably 85% of staff's time to manage and maintain those services. going forward each and every day, every week, every month of the year. So I'm going to pass it over to Agnes, and she's going to start walking you through the program and a bit of the history, if I could.
Thank you. Good morning. CCBF program, formerly known as the Federal Gas Tax Fund, is provided by the Government of Canada and can be used for infrastructure projects that support productivity and economic growth, a clean environment, and strong communities and cities. In BC, the program is administered through a tripartite agreement between the federal and provincial government and the Union of BC Municipalities. This program provides upfront, predictable, long-term funding to support community infrastructure priorities that meet community needs while respecting the principle of incremental spending and not displacing current infrastructure investments. All funds must be used for public use and benefit and in accordance with the eligibility criteria in the administrative agreement. In the 2022 and 2023 fiscal year, the TNRD received just over $1 million in funding. The current CCBF agreement expires in 2024. As some of you may not know, I held the position of grants coordinator with the regional district from 2006 to early 2020. And I was the primary point of contact for what was then called the Federal Gas Tax Program. The information I'm going to share with you is based on a review of Electoral Area Committee minutes, where I actually learned something, board minutes, and my own history in working with this program. Funding under this program was established in 2005. In BC, regional district funds were given to the regional district for the benefit of the organization and not earmarked for EAs based on population. I'm just going to clarify that a little bit. The populations that they're referring to were electoral area and First Nations populations. Under the gas tax agreement, funds were given to the regional districts for the benefit of the organization as a whole. However, they were not identified to be for electoral area use only. In deciding with what to do with the funding at the time, then CAO John Smith spoke with UBCM and canvassed other regional districts and found that the majority of the other regional districts placed funds in a global fund. The TNRD was almost unique in how it allocated this funding compared to other regional districts in BC. Eligible projects at the time under the original program were limited. Those that applied to us as regional districts were water and wastewater, solid waste, and community energy systems. And it was under this criteria that we did a lot of the energy efficiency upgrades that a lot of funds were allocated to. At the same time, there were also a number of other infrastructure funding programs open. And we were very fortunate at that time in that the majority of our water system improvement applications were successful. So we were getting a lot of money for our water systems. As the TNRD had a limited number of community facilities, we requested the okay to provide funding for not-for-profits as they operated a number of community facilities like community halls for our rural residents. The direction we received from UBCM was that as long as we had a contract in place requiring the third party to abide by the terms and agreement of the gas tax funding, we could provide third-party funding with the understanding that ultimately the TNRD was going to be responsible for repaying funds for any projects that didn't proceed, or I'm sorry, for any projects that failed, were not completed, or if any costs were paid that were not eligible under the funding. Initially, the third-party projects were small, and they were tied primarily to energy efficiency improvements like furnaces and installation. Just as a couple of examples, we had a couple of community halls up at the North Thompson that weren't being used a lot. The furnaces were old, they were difficult to operate, and one of them was a wood furnace, so they had to get in there hours before to heat up the facility. And for the ones that had the propane furnace, they were inefficient and costly to operate. So what we did was we provided funding to replace the furnaces. And as the heating was then more effective and efficient and cost less to operate, these community halls started having more events and more fundraising events, and they then became more financially viable. Another example that helped out these community halls was the replacement of potable water supply holding tank because the condition of the existing tank got compromised somehow and the water quality could not be guaranteed. Providing funding for this type of initiative also really helped out the community group because then they were able to save costs on holding events and not having to provide bottled water. In 2013 and 14, the gas tax criteria categories were expanded to include culture, tourism, and recreation. Up until now, projects were typically always administered by the grants coordinator. And because the community groups had limited financial resources, we would pay the contractor directly. This helped us comply with our procurement policy as we would require the community group to obtain quotes. We would review the quotes, we would select the contractor and enter into an agreement with the contractor to complete the work. With the expansion of the eligibility criteria, the dollar value and project scope kept getting larger. With the larger project, we would then require the assignment of a designated community member who was a point of contact and our eyes on the ground. When the project exceeded $100,000, the project was usually assigned to the manager of facilities, which then ultimately delayed works on our own capital projects. A lot has changed since 2005. We have added 6 fire departments and 4 more water systems. In addition, new potable water quality guidelines are more stringent and costs to achieve compliance have increased. Also, other infrastructure grant programs don't seem to come around as often, and they are increasingly oversubscribed. At one point in time, this was quite a few years ago, we had submitted 6 applications and we were successful in securing all 6. Currently, if we submit 3 applications under one program, we may receive approval for 1. I'd like to provide a comparison of what we as a local government are required to do to apply for funding compared to what is required of not-for-profits when they approach us for funding. When the TNRD applies for funding, it's a time-consuming, complex process. And if you ever get a chance to walk by where Kim sits, she's got a shelf there full of binders. And these binders are anywhere between 1.5 to 3 inches. That's a funding application. That's what we have to do to apply to the federal and provincial government for these large infrastructure programs. Basically, when we apply for funding, we're required to build a business case justifying the need for funding, provide confirmation of leverage funding, as very few programs provide 100% funding, provide confirmation of funding to pay for cost overruns or ineligible costs, provide financial statements and budgets, provide confirmation of how we will manage and maintain improvements moving forward. And we also have to provide confirmation of in-place asset management strategies for infrastructure replacement. I'm not sure if you're aware that many of these programs also allow us to submit an application on behalf of an improvement district or a community group. That would be someone who would own a community hall. If we submit this application, however, and are successful, funding will only be provided if the asset is turned over to the TNRD. Currently, if a community group is looking for funding, they will approach you as their electoral area director. And once the project is vetted for eligibility, confirmation of ownership, and society good standing, the request for funding goes through to the board for approval. The majority of these groups request 100% funding and often come back to the board for additional funding to cover overrun costs. In addition, electoral area directors have also made discretionary funding available to cover costs that may be ineligible under the CCBF program. After the project is complete, the TNRD is still responsible for meeting all the reporting requirements. I think now we will turn it over, Scott.
Thank you, Agnes. So now I'd like to introduce Brant. Brant, are you there and can you hear us?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Great.
Okay.
So if you are ready to go, we will have you start, please. So this is Brant Falker from UBCM. Welcome.
There we go. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me here, and thanks, Agnes, for that presentation. You know, usually go around the province and provide a similar presentation. So I think you touched on most of the kind of the important pieces of the history. So I'll talk through it from program administrator perspective. So Canada Community Building Fund, which is the program in which the Community Works Funds is delivered, has been in existence since 2005. It was originally envisioned as a municipal transfer from the federal government through gas tax to deal with core infrastructure priorities for every local government in Canada. So that program in its initial stages was really based on sustainable infrastructure programming for core infrastructure, which included water, wastewater, roads, etc. And it was an outcomes-based program, and that's an important piece that I'll loop back to. So all programs, all projects that receive funding through this program had to demonstrate that it resulted in a measurable outcome, which is, clean environment, cleaner air, cleaner water. Just for context, I have been delivering this program since 2009. So I've seen the growth of this program over the years and some changes that have been involved. But essentially, nationally, it's a $2.2 billion program. It's a big program. It's transferred to all provinces based primarily on a per capita allocation. And then UBCM delivers the program through 3 funding streams. One of them, which I think is the topic of today, which is the Community Works Fund, is delivered back to local governments on a per capita allocation formula. So it means all local governments, all municipalities receive funding on a per capita with a funding floor, and then the regional districts receive all populations not included in the municipal populations with a funding floor. So this translates to around $300 million a year. And for Community Works Funds, it translates to about $15 million a year, which is transferred to local governments. The Community Works Funds is unique and probably a well-received program for a few reasons. One is it's directly allocated. So there are conditions to it, which we'll talk to in a minute, but it is delivered twice a year based on a funding floor. It's upfront funds. It's really based on the foundation that local governments are best positioned to make decisions on what local priorities are needed. They invest in those projects and then they report after the fact. So there are some terms and conditions. Every local government has a funding agreement with UBCM as the administrator of the program. And as Agnes spoke to, there are terms and conditions around reporting, audit, keeping of records. The intent of the program since 2005 has primarily been for local government-owned assets and investments in core infrastructure needs. So it really is another tool for local governments in addressing infrastructure gaps for their communities. That string has maintained throughout the years. What we noted in the early days in 2009 to when it was amended in 2014 was there were some observed challenges, specifically within regional districts around where you could invest your funds, right? So there was limited eligible investment categories, and then funds were being held up for that reason. So we made some amendments to the program on a case-by-case to provide some exceptions for regional districts to be able to provide funds to non-local government entities that provided a core local government service, and then but that regional district would be kind of on the hook for the reporting compliance as we don't have contracts specifically with non-local governments. In 2014, what the big changes were was we kind of blew the lid off the eligible categories. So it still was an outcomes-based program, but local governments could invest in more eligible categories. So as Agnes mentioned, rec centers or rec and sport and culture were kind of the bigger ones that came out of that. But it moved from 6 categories to 17 categories. And we also at that point, instead of having a amendment for every regional district to allow for delivery of funding to third parties, we just did a blanket approval, provided that they understood that the intent of the program would be that this was for core local government infrastructure, with some exceptions if there were some other projects that they deemed as their local government priorities. So moving forwards, we've had a few double payments of the program. We're currently living in year 10 of our 10-year agreement. So we are up for renewal next year. And so we're looking closely at the program and the program outcomes across the province. And what we're noting, with the kind of expansion of the categories and the kind of blanket approval for local governments to provide funds to third parties, we're starting to see more and more funds move away from local government-owned assets to third-party contracts. They're typically smaller projects, and they're more challenging for us to report on. So we need to report outcomes and benefits of the program nationally. And so what we're seeing is, because we have a reporting threshold of $100,000, a lot of these projects fall under that threshold. So we really aren't telling that story nationally about the benefits this program is having from the regional district perspective. So that's one of the pieces that we're going to be looking at as we're looking at renewal. So how do we tell that story? How do we improve reporting in regional districts? And really, I think that the other kind of piece that we're trying to consider really is around our funds. We're seeing a lot of unspent funds in local governments, unspent funds, and we're coming to the year 10 of that program. We're not really seeing these funds being spent. So we're going to be going around in the coming months to be asking those questions about, are they included in 5-year capital plans? Are these funds earmarked for core infrastructure projects? Because when we go to negotiate a new program, one of the questions that we're going to be asked is why is there a considerable amount of unspent funds sitting in gas tax accounts over those years? So I think this program will continue moving forward. So I just want to state that. I mean, there's all intention from the federal government that there will be a continuation of the CCBF program. I think there's value of it. The third party contract piece is something that we are starting to look at a little bit more. I will also say that our quick analysis is all municipalities in BC invest in locally their own assets. I would say across the country, there are very few exceptions where funds are being delivered to non-local government entities for projects. So that's something we'll be looking at as well when we're talking about a renewed 10-year agreement, to consider what sort of conditions we might be looking at moving forward. I think I might leave it at that, unless I don't have a pure presentation. I think Agnes covered off the whole history of the program, but I'm really happy to take any questions about the CCBF program.
Thank you, Brent. He can only hear us if we use our microphones on Zoom, so we'll ask you some questions.
Does anybody else have any questions they want to ask about the community fund? Yes. Director Grenier.
Thank you. I'm just missing it a little bit between Agnes's presentation and your presentation. We're a regional district. The allocation is based on the population of each of the EAs. We have 10 EAs, but the money is granted to the regional district. And then there's an administration of that at the regional district level, whether EAs decide or EA directors decide that we want to allocate it back to the EAs individually, or pooling, or some combination. Where I'm kind of puzzled is that we have 10 EA directors, we have 17 municipal directors, is the intention of the EA money being granted to the TNRD for just the EA, or is it the EA and the municipalities? Because they get their money too. Thank you.
If I may, the money is granted to the TNRD for TNRD purposes. You're correct, municipalities get funds for their own infrastructure. So because it is granted to the TNRD, we're basically the government for the electoral areas. It would be primarily for our infrastructure. Of course, any decision that's made at the board level on how funds are spent is a board decision. But this funding was always understood to be for TNRD infrastructure.
If I may add to that, because the program's really built from our perspective as UBCM, as the administrator on local government autonomy and decision making, we provide the funding to the regional district. There's nothing in our contract that suggests that it be how it be delivered within the regional district or broken down by per capita. I must also note the population model we use is all populations outside of the municipal populations. So that will include any populations outside of municipal populations will go to the RD for this. So what we are seeing in other regional districts as well is that there is a decision that be divided up by EAs, and that's certainly not part of the contract we have with the regional district. Thanks.
Thank you both. So just following that, it's awarded based on population, and separate funds are given to municipalities for their populations. So that would suggest, in looking at that rationale, that the intention is that the populations of the electoral areas are supposed to be the benefactors of that money. And if the TNRD decides we're going to put 10% of that pooled amount, or we've had a pooled amount, and I think it was 10% went into it, the balance, the 90%, would be allocated to the electoral areas, or that was the historic practice, and probably on a population basis. I also was told from a previous director that there were some EAs that were so sparse in population that the electoral areas made some special allocation to those sparsely populated EAs. But to be clear, that money was to be spent in EA areas, not sort of then divided again into EA and municipal areas, unless the EA and the municipality want to get together. That's a long question.
Chair Laird, just to answer that, and that, well, how you explain it is correct. I guess my comment to that would be all of our TNRD assets are in those electoral areas. So all of our water systems, our fire departments are all there representing and supporting our residents. And right now we're funding that predominantly through other grants or taxation. And other than that small pool, because really this building and Mission Flats are really the only assets, and including libraries, that would be region-wide that we would need to potentially support. So we do have some in municipalities like this building, Mission Flats, and all of our libraries, and then everything else that we own and have as an asset are in the electoral areas. Some more than others. Some have many assets, some have very few. And that's some of our challenges right now when we're trying to fund and making sure that we're properly operating some of our water systems, for example.
Thank you for that. So if we had a project that crossed both EAs and municipalities, this is a theoretical question, I guess. The EAs would contribute their share to that, and municipalities out of their gas tax money would contribute theirs to this cross EA and municipal project. And so when we're looking at pool projects, I think that not only do we have to say, is the project uniquely for just the EA, but is it EA areas and municipal areas. Would you agree that's sort of an approach that would be fair?
That is certainly fair, and that's actually been demonstrated very well in areas M and N, where the city of Merritt, along with Director Laird and Director Graham, have provided funding for some great projects, including their recreation center and other curling club sorts of things, where the municipality, being the city of Merritt, and the EA has contributed equally to make that program go forward. That would benefit not only the folks in Merritt, but then everybody else in the electoral areas.
Thank you. Just to give a more recent example from a smaller community than Merritt in Ashcroft, Director Rice from Area I gave $30,000 in gas tax funding to the Ashcroft Curling Club. The Village of Ashcroft contributed, I believe off the top of my head, $90,000. So that is the kind of, the Village of Lytton, I know, benefited from pool improvements on the basis that the Village of Lytton pool served the residents of Area I, but the Village of Lytton also contributed funding to that project.
So just to follow up on both of those examples, neither of them are TNRD assets.
That's correct. The curling club in Ashcroft is owned by the Village of Ashcroft, but the rationale of the EA directors was that these facilities, whether it's the curling rink in Ashcroft or the pool in Lytton or the pool in any community, it does not just serve that municipality's residents, it serves the broader area. So for example, the Ashcroft pool is used by residents in areas E and I, because they currently have no access to any other pools because Lytton is no longer available and Cache Creek is closed. So they come from Spence's Bridge, from 16 Mile, from Loon Lake, from Wallachine, from Savinaw to the Ashcroft pool and make use of it. So an EA director might say, it is in my residents' benefit to contribute money to the Ashcroft pool to keep it going so that the residents of my electoral area can continue to use it.
Okay, so I'm hearing a statement that's starting to go down the road where in the future, a lot of these projects that are not TNRD assets are not going to be considered as much.
Well, we're wanting to look at that. We're wanting to provide the data and the information to show you exactly how it's been spent since 2005. And then give you some ideas and recommendations and proposals on maybe what we need to prioritize sometimes. And we got more slides to share that will walk you through all those details. And for you, Director Smith, one example would be, I know last year with the previous mayor of Clinton, herself and the CAO was in conversation with the previous EA director, Ms. Watson, about doing some kind of agreement with their recreation facility as well. It just never come to fruition before the end of the term. So you may hear about that in the future as well.
Thank you.
Other questions for our listeners? Any other questions for Brant? I think you're getting off the hook, Brant. Any final comments, Brant, that you might have?
No, thanks for inviting me to this. It's always good to get a sense of how the decisions are being made at the local level here with this program. We will be going out and doing a bit more of an engagement strategy over the few months as UBCM to talk about the next iteration of the program. So I'm sure you will all see and hear from me again shortly. So thanks for having me.
Brant, is it true you'll be presenting at SILGA coming up in April as well?
I will be. So
Okay.
We'll be talking a bit about next steps for the program. I think I touched on a bit of those pieces. We're also going to be sending out a survey to all members. So that should be launched on April 1st. We're really asking about kind of high level questions about the Community Works Fund program and kind of what our next steps might be moving forward. As mentioned, our interest is really understanding why funds are remaining in unspent funds and really about the challenges from regional district perspective. So look out for that, and we'll be seeing you the next month or so.
Thank you, Brant. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've just got some information about how Area M and N have partnered with the City of Merritt. The funds that we provide basically make whatever project that has been proposed work. We supply a minimal amount of money to be sure that, for instance, the curling club, between the TNRD reps and the city, we put up $160,000. The roof is going to cost $300,000. So the curling club, who is a society, functioning society that they don't own the curling club, but they maintain and look after it. Without that funding, they would still not get a roof on their building. And that is what TNRD community funds do. They're for our communities. And if we didn't have that opportunity, we wouldn't have a roof on the curling rink. We wouldn't have a new washroom going in at the Fall Fair building, which we're only paying probably about, by the look of it now, we might be paying about 50% of the cost of that. And the rest is being generated by the society that runs it. The only thing that we put money into that is a TNRD asset is the park in Lower Nicola. And we've funded all of the cost on that. We don't cost share with anybody. And you know, that it's so key that if we don't have the ability to support our societies, we wouldn't have anything in our communities, because municipalities have all of these assets already. They have the curling rink, and they have the hall, and they have the cooling, the pool, and all that. They have the ability to make the decision on how they're going to spend the money in their communities. In the TNRD, because we cost share or have shared use of all these facilities, we share taxes, we share it with recreational facilities in there. Obviously, the fire protection is a large part of the protection that people expect. And without the ability to do that, we would have nothing. And I know that they're classified as, you know, third party, but they are the people that are supplying our facilities in our regional district. And without them, for instance, our hall in Lower Nicola had a flood. We're not sure what the damage is. It's not a TNRD property. They're quite happy to do that, but they have to look after that and maintain the building. Both Herb and I have put funds into that building over the years, different spots for different projects inside the building. So it's a functional meeting hall. Everything works in it. It's a beautiful facility until they have the flood. But that's where it's so important that we have that ability to grow our communities. Director.
Thank you for those comments. I would agree. There's some really great projects that we do and will continue to do. I mentioned that in my opening comments. We just want to move to kind of Kim wants to walk through just a bit of the policy overview, and then I'll get right into the crux of the presentation, which is about some of the concerns we're having.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to add a little bit to what David has said about the projects that we took on in the Nicola Valley that helped not only the community itself, but the rural areas at no extra burden and tax burden to the taxpayers. They didn't have to pay for it. It was like a gift. Pretty important in my mind, that we could do all those things, and it just meant that we could make our communities a better place to live. And I wouldn't like to see that changed. I'd like to see it carry on. Sounds like it might be an issue, but that's what we're doing. We're discussing it. Thank you.
I'm here to talk about the current policy as it is for the CCBF. So the TNRD receives, as you guys have heard, receives funds from the federal government, the Canada Works Fund. The first 10%, and I'm just taking it from the policy, the first 10% goes into the pooled account. The remaining 90%, and the pooled account is for, I should note, is for projects with broad regional use, like benefit. The remaining 90% is allocated on a per capita basis to each electoral area based on the most recent census numbers. And so we just had a recent census, so our numbers have now been updated. And so now area B, because it's small and has a low population, every one of the electoral areas provides $1,500 that goes into electoral area B to make things a little bit more even. And despite something to note, that despite the allocation process, as it's been noted, that the federal gas tax funds belong to the TNRD as a whole. So they're given to the TNRD, and then we from there funnel them down into the EAs. EA directors, and this has been known to happen, are free to redistribute their funds to other areas in the region. So sometimes when projects happen, Isabel, there was a walking trail system put in Isabel Park, and a lot of the electoral areas donated or passed some funds along into that project. So all federal gas tax funds must be used in accordance to the eligibility criteria laid out in the master agreement with first UBCM, then province and the feds. So we have to make sure that we're following the agreement. To best ensure that proper information is gathered to determine eligibility of third-party projects, we ask for a written application. So most of you have seen the gas tax application online. So it's quite a lengthy process. And in there, as Brent mentioned, we want to see measurable outcomes. So for example, let's say a roofing project with solar, we want to see what their hydro bills were before and then what their hydro bills are after. That's in a reporting process, because based on the amount, we're going to have to report that back to UBCM. TNRD will work with third-party groups to ensure that our procurement policy is followed. That's part of the policy. And third-party groups have 24 months to execute and complete projects. Any unspent funds have to be returned back to us. And third-party recipients must agree to provide the necessary reporting information or be subject to repay the gas tax funds for the project and may not be considered for eligible future funding. So that's just kind of a little bit of a rundown.
Any questions at all?
Any questions?
Awesome. We're almost to the end where we can actually then get into a discussion. But I really appreciate the comments that Director Laird and Director Graham mentioned as well. And this is all about just sharing information and facts. But when you, Director Graham, mentioned that it's like free to the taxpayers, the part that, and you'll see in some of our concerns, is you've got all these staff in here that are sometimes working on those projects that are funded by all the taxpayers. And that's delaying other strategic planning and other things that we're doing. So that's really one of our concerns that we'll talk a little bit about. So it's not free to the taxpayers because they end up paying all their wages as well. So from a concern standpoint, as I've just mentioned, staff capacity, you've got one grants coordinator, and she's sitting right here. This is Kim for the entire regional district. That's how it's been resourced. That's how it's been resourced for decades. She's the only person that really pulls all this information together. So as she's receiving invoices from Loon Lake, or if she's receiving invoices from Blue River, wherever these projects are, she's here in Kamloops, and we don't have the resources and the expertise and the project management skills to be all over the regional district. And is one of our big concerns. From a staff time standpoint, I also just mentioned too, that we are all funded by taxpayers across the entire regional district, myself, Ian. So when we're working on third-party projects, you got to keep in mind, if the majority of our projects are third party, our staff are funded by the regional district and are spending the time on those projects. Select groups benefit of significant time. There's some that you'll see in the examples that we're coming up where there's hundreds of hours being put towards some of the third-party projects. And they're great projects. Please don't get me wrong, but you just need to understand the complete picture. From a liability standpoint, from a third-party risks, there's insurance issues. If someone were to fall off a roof doing a job, a contractor, I can guarantee you they're coming back to the TNRD. They're not coming back to the society. Ineligible expenses that Brant and Agnes talked about. And the big part is no project management. So we're relying on the society and whatever skill set they have to move these programs forward. And sometimes that's very limited, and sometimes you've got a real expert on there that can really move them forward. A lot of the third parties lack money, of course, so they're sometimes having to come back to us multiple times, which takes more time and effort and investment. And again, just no funds to cover some of the overruns. Speaking from a forensic audit standpoint, I lived and breathed this for 18 months, and it's certainly now in my DNA. So when it comes to procurement, when we're buying services, we're buying products, and we're doing some of these projects, they need to follow our procurement policy. Absolutely need to follow it. So when they don't, myself and Carla, when we sign off of it on those things, we can't. Because at the end of the day, when we do our audit, and we're going to do a compliance audit coming up this year, we're going to be held accountable for our policies and procedures. And that's another concern that I'm sure Carla will speak about in her slide coming up. Transparency is another concern. This is supposed to be for full public participation. And we know for a fact there's some projects that we work on are very exclusive societies where they don't maybe have the entire EA public involved in some of these, or allowing everyone to participate in that service. Some of the projects, from our opinion, are nice to have, maybe not have to have. Same groups receive funding over and over again. There's requests for more funding when they have significant funding in their bank accounts as well. As an example, from our assets, TNRD water systems, and maybe the whole EA group maybe doesn't know all the facts, and you'll start to get this in the utilities, but we are in dire straits with all our water systems right now when it comes to capital and operation. We are just getting by, and you'll see that in the budgets as we're going forward. So that's why I'm feeling like that might be something we need to consider going forward. I talked about the forensic audit. Projects can be deemed ineligible by the federal government. And if that's the case, and if they say no, and it pushes back to the province, we're now on the hook to pay that money. And if the society can't pay that money, where does that come from? We don't have a budget for that. We don't have funding for that. Sure.
Just to add to one other point is the reporting is super important. So once the project's complete, I look back to the group and ask them to fill out a form and then also get those metrics. So for example, like I used before, I want to see your hydro bills before. I usually ask for that before and then afterwards, or a water system with water meters, for example. I want to see, because I need to provide it to UBCM, I'm looking for information on a decrease in water use, because ultimately that's the goal. So sometimes receiving this information from the third-party groups is not so easy. They don't always answer emails or respond, because ultimately the project's done and they've moved on. But I'm still needing to keep going. Thanks.
And just one last comment, if I could mention, and this is this came from the previous board, and it came from some residents as well, but some people, and this might be a sensitive topic to say, but I need to say it anyway, just to make sure I'm fully transparent, where some of the public and some of the past board members have brought concerns about this funding could also be considered a conflict of interest to some degree, because if you're going to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with communities and community groups, they feel like there could be support coming back from a political way too. So in talking with Brandt about that too, he also had that concern, and that's part of it going forward. I haven't seen that directly, but I can see how that perceived conflict could be out there because the EAs really support and push these projects for the goodness of their community, but there also could be that small perceived conflict there that there could be an issue going forward. So I'm going to pass over to Carla just from a CFO perspective.
Thank you. Good morning. So I guess I don't want to repeat everything that has been said. So coming at it from a perspective as the official rules that the CAO and the CFO hold for the TNRD as a whole, I think is important in the climate that we came from and that we're in, to understand that you've appointed us to roles to oversee the fiscal and fiduciary responsibilities, which includes budgeting, financial services, asset management, and risk management. And we have obviously policy and the compliance and those types of things. We have to be accountable and responsible to employees to make sure that we have good policies in place, because those policies actually protect them in their decision making. So part of that support in making sure that the policies support the actual system and the process that it was intended to set up. So part of the issue coming from me with fresh eyes coming into the TNRD is number one, we're here to represent and look at the TNRD as a whole. Number two, with the Community Canada Building Fund and the gas tax funds, what's the intent of the funds? One of the issues I have with the intent and what Brant is saying is when they come and ask about the unspent funds and the 5-year capital plans, I can absolutely say we have capital projects and capital plans that we cannot move forward with some of the core infrastructure because we don't have funding to spend on it. But then on the other hand, I say we have unallocated gas tax funds. That's a problem. So they're going to come forward and ask those questions. So we want to make sure that we are addressing that. Some of the other things they touched on from my perspective is we are obligated, it's TNRD funds, we're obligated for the reporting requirements on those funds. And it becomes very hard, as Kim was saying, with third-party funding. We have staffing resource issues with project management and third-party projects. We have not planned ahead of time for a lot of these projects. So you approve budgets and within the year, you're making decisions to include projects that were not on your financial plan. So we've got to talk about those types of things coming up. Most of our plans and our capital plans are included on budgets and you approve those through your financial planning. And I will pretty much stop there. I think that we'll probably get into other bits of information. And again, I don't want to repeat what's already been said. I think you're hearing some of the concerns. I think it'll be easier to see if we're able to give you some examples of those concerns.
Yeah, I just have one question. So I'm understanding the impact to staff, but do we have a number of the financial impacts from the management of the fund in the past that the staff have had to do? Or because I know the fund provides a percentage to the TNRD. So
Yeah, we're gonna.
You're gonna get there?
After these
Okay.
last comments, we're gonna move into a close, where we're gonna walk you through about 10 very specific examples, ones that Dave and Herb have already spoke to, and the ones that have happened with previous board members, so that we can walk you through some of the concerns, and you'll see the kind of
thank
the
you.
impact.
I just have make a comment. A lot of the things that our CFO was talking about do not involve gas tax money. It is overall budgeting for the TNRD. So some of it does and some of it doesn't, but are we as gas tax money have to support an asset management plan? Is that where gas tax money goes?
Absolutely. Every penny that flows into us from a revenue standpoint needs to be allocated.
Well, then I would like to see where the municipal members of our board are also supplying any kind of money that is coming from EA directors out of their gas tax to support that client.
They would also, like, so for example, your merit example, they would see that revenue coming in from the EAs, and they would have to report that in their financial planning.
Yeah, but they should be supporting. If the EA directors are building the asset management plan from their funds, where is the funds coming from? The municipal representatives to also help build that asset management plan.
Yeah, if it's a joint project, absolutely. And that's some of the planning and the allocation we need to start doing. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants with projects. So to Carla's point, well, if we have a project come up in June, that's brand new. It's not on our budget. It hasn't been approved by the board. So then it has to come back to the board for approval. So then we basically amend the budget then, and that would be the same process if you're partnering with a municipality as well.
Yeah.
So we can certainly talk through that.
Thank you.
I think a lot of the information, the next two slides, is information you already have in front of you on paper. So this is just the balances. So 3.5 currently is unallocated. We don't have really any projects right now other than ones that we've been starting to talk about. But that's the $3.5 million that's sitting there that's unused so far.
Can I just make a comment on that, please?
Sure. Yeah.
If you look at that list of money, we have EA directors that are dealing with water districts. We have EA directors that are dealing with building fire departments. And that money would disappear. There's not enough money there even to build one fire department and make it functional. So that, you know, it looks like a lot of money, but when you divide it into 10, and even in my area I have projects that I'm working on that will benefit the community. And one of them could possibly be a fire department. We haven't got that far yet. So our gas tax money that we have, it might look like there's a large pool of money there. It is if you put 3.5 million into a budget and then spend it all on 2 or 3 TNRD projects. But when we do that, we need to see where the municipal government reps or the cities are also putting in the same amount of money. Otherwise, then it's a 60-40 split. So 60% comes from one municipality. So I expect to see them 60% involved in any asset management plan.
So just to maybe provide some clarification. So say as an example, say we do a fire department in Lower Nick, like we talked about doing, that could be TNRD owned. So of course, that would represent all the electoral area population. So it should be funded by the electoral area and the TNRD. And so we're in that case, we're partnering with Merit. So that might be different if we do get down that road and do that. But so example, another one would be the Avonby Fire Department. It's an unincorporated area. We own that fire department. We manage and operate that fire department. I'm not sure if Clearwater is involved at all. This is 100% owned by the TNRD. So they wouldn't be participating in funding that operation. That's our responsibility. So it's based on, I guess, the users and the people that are benefiting from the service. But we can certainly talk more.
Thank you. That slide that you just had, could you just put that back up again? So area J, my area, has $436,000 of unspent gas tax money. That was what Renee had advised me when I came in. That's what I was told by our staff. But in sitting down with our staff, with Jamie and Regina and others, I come to learn that we've allocated, or the previous director has allocated a large chunk. So Jamie, I think we've got 400,000 of the 435 dedicated to one of the fire halls. And if that's the case, that leaves 35,000, not 435,000. And we haven't even started to talk about the dollar figures for the Savinaw water treatment plant, which is going to be $4 million. So I guess I'm a little bewildered because this is suggesting, oh, we got lots of money, but it seems to me a whole lot of the stuff has been allocated, or at least in my area, it's been allocated.
So I've never suggested that this is a lot of money. This is not a lot of money. We have big projects that are going to be 5 times this size. We're just wanting to make sure that all of these comments, that we're prioritizing things and we're working together to allocate the money and making sure it's in our budgets and making sure that we're planning resources and staffing to make sure we can execute them successfully. Sometimes we get caught and we're spinning our wheels on projects that come up that were last minute or have not been adopted or part of our strategic plan. So that's what we're trying to do, is just share information, get all on the same page, and then start to work together.
Thank you. So I'm new. I've got mandate from my constituents to do other things. We've talked about that with staff and the processes and going back to the constituents to get them to vote on whether they want to incur these costs. So a community hall effort that I'm spearheading is a new project.
Right.
And you've indicated, well, and it would be with a third party. And I'm not clear if the message is work with a third party, don't work with a third party, because maybe some of these assets are better managed by the third party. Once we create the asset, better that the third party run it than we run it. They can run it maybe cheaper.
Absolutely. And we do have lots of examples.
So
is
that part of the message about the third party from the previous part of your presentation?
I think that the point from there is making sure we choose the third party partnerships that can follow all the requirements, all the procurement, follow all the rules, and come to a successful conclusion, and not involve all the concerns and issues. Like we're trying to make them as clean as possible, make us efficient and effective. So it's not about stepping away from third party. It's simply just working better, working more organized and more coordinated version of that. This slide, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. This slide is also in your paperwork. It just basically shows those same totals and which ones were allocated towards TNRD projects are about 46% over the whole history of the gas tax, and then which ones were third party related. So it's just a fact. That's all it is. It doesn't mean they're good or they're bad. It's just those are the numbers. And the numbers on the bottom were ones that were approved and pulled out for some of our core TNRD assets as well and committed to. Jamie?
Just a point of clarification on this to Director Granier's comment. The list here saying third party, we're talking about assets, physical assets owned by the third party. So not talking about the operational piece. So I'll give an example. We own the Little Fort Community Hall. It's a TNRD owned asset, and we partner with a nonprofit society to operate it, but it's our asset. So in this example here, that would fall under the TNRD owned column. So it has no bearing on who's running the day-to-day. That's a contractual operational thing. It's whose name's on the title of the asset.
Yeah, that's a great clarification, and just that's an example of how those partnerships work and work really well, and we are fully in support of that. So we just got to find more of them is what we're suggesting. So just from the next steps, like we want to get as much feedback here in the next hour and a half from this group, and then we'll pull all that together. It'll go to the policy and governance meeting, and then it'll go to the board back at the beginning of May is our proposed timelines right now. So the rest of the presentation is, like we said, we wanted to move into closed, and we wanted to just go through some of these really live examples so you can see some of the concerns and issues. And then we'd like to get together and just have a talk about how we can maybe find some efficiency and find a solution forward, because we want to find something that we're not here to pull money away from the EA directors at all. We just want to make sure the process is, we're all on the same page from a process standpoint, so that when Carla and I have to sign off on this, we're doing it we're doing what we're obligated to do. Awesome. So, yeah, absolutely.